It has been called one of Canada's most sensational yet least known robbery capers. The Vancouver Safety Deposit Vault heist of 1977 was supposed to be the perfect crime, and it very nearly was. What went wrong, and who was behind it, and what could be learned from what happened? Those questions are tackled in a new true crime book. Here to talk about the almost perfect heist, the incredible story of the Vancouver Safety Deposit Box robbery, is author Don Levers. What drew you to this tale?
Well, I'd written a children's book in 1985, and I knew about the heist happening in 1977. I was still in Vancouver at the time, had been with the Vancouver Police Reserves for a period of time, and so it was the perfect robbery. It was like this is something out of the movies, Ocean's 11, and so after writing the children's book, I thought it would make a great movie, and I started to try and do a movie script. I'd written a children's book. I didn't know anything about writing a script. I approached CBC in the end, and one of the producers there was interested, and but that didn't come to pass. So I ended up writing a novel inspired by the robbery because at the time there wasn't the ability to research all of the things that you can do today on the internet. It was still in its infancy. So I did a novel inspired by it, what I thought what could have happened. And when I started going to do my research, I stopped into the Vancouver Public Library and I approached the librarian and I said, there was a robbery here 10 years ago, just down the road. Do you have any micro? She says, come with me. And so she took me over to a file cabinet and she pulled out an entire file of all of the paper clippings from the day it happened right through to 1982 of all of the newspaper clippings that were associated with the heist.
And that novel became Loot for the Taking, of course, based on
Yes,
those events
yes.
of January '77. But then, having done that, what made you want to go even deeper into this into the nonfiction realm?
I, in 2019, after moving out to Alberta here, I decided to finish writing Loot for the Taking, which I'd started in 1987. Self-published in 2017, and at book signings, people would say, "Why didn't you write the real story?" Well, because I couldn't find things on it. So, anyways, I started researching, and I approached a news anchor here in Edmonton that you may be aware of, Gord Stanky, and told Gord what I was wanting to do. I said, "How do you ask people about things that happened 40 years ago? Ask them about the weather." And that gets the conversation started. So I went to Vancouver and I interviewed police officers. I interviewed the prosecutor on the case, who ended up becoming a BC Supreme Court judge, and other witnesses that I could start to tell the story. Another life event got in the way, and I ended because I told Gord about heading to Normandy, and he said it would be great to walk in my dad's footsteps. And that resulted in my book, Our Father's Footsteps, which is about four men who landed on Normandy. Then in 2023, I was approached by a company and a film company in Winnipeg that was doing a program called Almost Unsolved Heists. And they asked if I'd be interested. That took about 30 seconds to say yes. So we did that program, and I got to be one of the talking heads, and they used all my research that I'd been doing. That reinvigorated me to write the real story. And after doing the program, I came home and I started delving it into further. One of the things I did in 2017 is I found out that one of the men who was involved in the heist had been arrested in Montreal for a string of armored car robberies. So I sent a letter off to Corrections Canada and got a note back saying it was considered. And I sent a copy of the book, Loot for the Taking, and they got back to me and said this is contraband, so I couldn't do that. Another author suggested I send some money to the guy's uh, prison account and see if he'd consent to an interview. I did that. I get a letter at Christmas time, and I, standing at the mailbox, ripped it open and, "Dear Mr. Levers, I have no self-interest in talking about this story. Now, possibly it's because the gang who pulled this off, members of this crew were from Montreal, and some of them were associated with the Irish Mafia's West End gang in Montreal. And even the witnesses that I spoke to throughout doing the research, they said, I'll tell you the story and I'll tell you what my involvement, but you can't use my name. 45, 46 years after the heist, they were still concerned that there might be a knock at the door one day and it might be somebody from the Irish Mafia.
So some of the names have been changed to protect the guilty.
Yes, the names of the people involved that pulled the heist are correct. The witnesses, even some of the police officers, didn't want their real identity shown, but so I did change some of those. But some of the other names are included, and they're right out of the headlines, right out of the newspaper clipping, so they were public records. So.
All right. Now, these days, 402 West Pender at Pender and Homer, best known as the BC Securities Building, but back in 1977, it was the Vancouver Safety Deposit Vaults, a nine-story brick, stone, and glazed terracotta structure, one of Canada's historic places. And you got to tour the building a few years later. What did you discover?
Well, when I started researching, I was in Vancouver, so I went down to the address. And back in those days, you could walk in the front doors, and had my daughter with me. So when she was about 8 or 9 at the time, and we started to wander the halls. And I wondered as I was doing that, did these guys do the same thing? Did they sort of case the joint, so to speak? We wandered the halls up to the second, all the way up to the eighth, ninth floor, looking out the windows, looking at the fire escapes, and then we went down to the basement level, and there was bars on the doors still to prevent people from getting into the vault. The following weekend, I went down and I ended up talking to a custodian, and he said he told me his story, which was amazing on its own. But anyways, he took me down inside the vault, and it was still littered at the time with deposit box doors, with some of the tiers of um, where the deposit boxes were held, and that were all still twisted up. And there was a big metal plate on the wall that was welded over the hole that these guys had made their way through. And that hole was a 22-inch diameter hole that they had, because one of the things of the Vancouver Safety Deposit Vaults at the time, they had a banner on the side of the building on the ninth floor. Vancouver Safety Deposit Vaults, safest armored vaults in the West, burglar and fireproof. Well, it wasn't quite so burglar proof. And they had told customers that they didn't need alarms because they had 7-ton doors, 7 inches thick, and they had 34 inches of concrete and armored plating separating the inside of the vault from the boiler room. Well, these guys used a coring drill, cut out the first part of the door, pulled out a 22-inch thick, 22-inch diameter, 7-inch, 9-inch thick piece of concrete, and then used a thermal lance. And that's like a torch, but it burns at 4,000 degrees Celsius, capable of actually melting concrete. And they burned through the wall. Well, when they burned through the wall, they were off the mark a little bit, and they burned in the back of some safety deposit boxes, and ended up burning up the valuables inside of that. And then they had to push that tier of vaults ahead so they could crawl inside. One of the things that was always on my mind is this was done. They may have started January the 1st, 1977, over the long weekend, and they didn't complete it. They don't believe that weekend, and that was one of the questions that I wanted to ask the chap I sent the letter to. Did you really start on the 1st of January? And so the police speculated they did, and they actually penetrated the vault on the weekend of the 7th to 9th of January.
Now, as you point out in the book, world-class robbery needs three things to succeed: a bold plan, the skill to stay one step ahead of the law, and finally the right team to pull it off. It seems like this heist had all of these things, yet the men who perpetrated this crime were still caught. What went wrong?
Well, it's called the almost perfect heist because they got in, they broke into 1,200 of 2,500 safety deposit boxes. The famous heist in London, the Lloyd's Bank heist, and the Nice, France heist. There was only 200 to 300 boxes in each of those cases broken into, and that's why the police and everybody was speculating it could be the world's largest. So after breaking in, and they took the cash, they took the gold, they took the jewels, but the floor, when the police finally arrived, was littered with ankle to knee deep junk left behind that they just threw aside, including all the safety deposit boxes they had emptied out. So then they put the stuff into 9 suitcases and left a lot of their equipment behind. There, excuse me, there wasn't the they never did find the thermal lance handle, and they never did find the coring drill. And there was speculation that that could have been dumped in one of the waterways, or perhaps even a, uh, a refuse bin in the back alleys of downtown Vancouver. It was never located. And so then they headed off. And here's where it gets really strange: is that they flew out of town. Why they didn't, one of the guys was living in Surrey at the time. Why they didn't take the stuff and leave it at his place, or why they didn't pack it up in a truck. One of the speculations from the prosecutor was that they had a problem with the thermal lance, which put them a week behind, and they were going to put the stuff in a transport truck to go across Canada. It would have, if it had have been even that weekend, if they had sent it out Sunday morning on a transport truck, it would have been past Calgary before they opened the vault on Monday morning, and nobody would have been any the wiser. But instead, they had it in 9 suitcases and headed for the airport.
Now, as you point out, they could have packed these into crates like engine parts, and no one would have been the wiser. It would have been packed in the belly of the aircraft. Instead, they rather carelessly put it into regular old luggage.
One of the when they were checking in their bags, one was so heavy, the ticket agent says, "Geez, this is really heavy. What do you got in here? Ore samples?" "No, Eskimo carvings." And he said, "Do you get a lot of miners through here?" And the guy says, "Oh, all the time." And so they ended up basically that was their folly. And in speaking with one of the people at the airport that didn't want to be named, he said, like you just said, if they had to put it in toolboxes with locks, they were always sending out this kind of equipment with workers to various sites around the country. They wouldn't have paid any attention to the weight or to the fact, and it wasn't the weight so much as their suitcases were bottom heavy. And one of the reasons for that is in those 9 cases was 7,700 ounces of gold in the various suitcases. They could squish the top of the bag, but it was heavy. So one of the station baggage handlers, there was rumor that one of the handles broke off, and the guy almost had a hernia. And they said no, these guys were lifting heavy bags all the time, so that wasn't the issue. But it was the strangeness of, and not just one bag that felt a little strange. The first time they checked, it was like 4 bags that they felt were a little strange. And when they opened them up, after pulling them aside, they were concerned about safety, and they weren't thinking robbery. When they opened it up and saw a couple of bank bags in there, they said, we better get in touch with somebody to find out what's going on here. And that was about 10 o'clock at night. And by 12 o'clock at night, as the plane left, they had all 9 suitcases.
Now, it seems like they were in a terrible rush to get back to Montreal, and you alluded to this earlier, but why the rush and why the need to get back to Montreal so quickly?
There again, that's another one of the questions. Like, why didn't you guys wait for a week? But the plane tickets had been bought several weeks before in cash from a Montreal travel agency, and they were scheduled to depart in different days. Although one of them was supposed to fly out, I think on the 3rd of January, which gets us back to wondering why, if the robbery really did start on the weekend of January 1st. But they were open tickets, so they were able to change the date. It wasn't a big deal.
Now, one of the closing chapters is entitled "Where Are They Now?" So, what ends up happening to the burglars? Were they ever brought to justice or served time?
Well, they and I don't want to give away the whole story, but yes, they I wondered, they were only ever convicted of possession of stolen goods. They were never they were charged but never convicted of the actual robbery. And as the police officer said, it was, but the time they would have gone through, because they admitted to that, they caught the plea to that, it was over and done with. They didn't have to get into talking about anybody else under oath, because there was speculation. Again, the speculation part of it, that there was actually 7 people involved, not just 5, and that 2 of them got away with anywhere between $500,000 and $1 million, and perhaps ended up in South America for a period of time. And one of the 5 skipped bail before he went to trial, and he didn't surface again until the mid 80s.
Now, what would you say the legacy of the Vancouver Safety Deposit Vaults heist is? I think of one in particular, the fact that I imagine that building would have an alarm system after this particular incident.
Well, funny you should mention it. There was a number of these other famous heists that did have alarms, and these thieves were able to take them apart and to bypass them. In this case here, 4 months before the heist, the Vancouver police knew they were in town, and then they must have figured out that they were being watched, and they left town about 4 months before. And the police approached the vault company and said, "You guys should really consider getting an alarm." Oh, and back to the 7-ton doors, the 34 inches of concrete. We don't need an alarm. And they did look into it, and they were quoted $1,200. And now this is 1977, $1,200, and it was going to cost $50 a month for monitoring. And we've got a guard here, but all the guard would do, and at one point there was a couple of guards, and all the guard would do if he thought something was off was call the police. And so there was no alarm system to bypass. And when with the number of safety deposit box, they didn't even open the top 9, 10 tiers of deposit box. They stayed to the ones below. And again, one of the an undercover police officer, there was both in the paper and the police believed that there was possibly 800 of the $1,000 bills in one of the deposit boxes. And that was never claimed for some reason, because the person that had it was believed to be he was a member of the Vancouver Stock Exchange and a known drug dealer.
This was
So, and with
Scotch
connections to the
Roberts.
West Coast. So, yes. And so that was never claimed. And that was the other thing about the whole heist, is that only 900 of the 1,200 people came and made any claims on what they had in there. And the floor being littered with everything that it was, there's a picture of a police officer holding up 2 5-pound ingots of silver. And at the time, silver was worth about $4.69 an ounce. So those two, their bags were heavy enough as it was. Those 5-pound ingots were worth less than $500 a piece. So they were discriminated. They discriminated against some of the things that they shouldn't be taking, and they were very discerning of what they were taking.
What do you hope people get out of the book?
Just that here's a little known Vancouver robbery that was world famous at the time that nobody knows about. And that although I did make a post on the Old Vancouver, BC Facebook page, and I put a picture of the book up there, and I says, "Does anybody?" And I had over 700 responses to people that recalled the event, and there was a lot of misinformation going on there about what really happened. But and hopefully the book, there's still lots of questions to be answered, but nobody wants to answer them. And unfortunately, the gentleman who's still, there's only one of them probably still alive. Three of them have passed away. One is alive for sure, and the last guy, if he is still alive, he's in his 90s. So, because I couldn't find anything on an obituary on any of his names or aliases or anything like that.
The name of the book is The Almost Perfect Heist, the incredible story of the Vancouver Safety Deposit Box Robbery. It is published by Sutherland House. My thanks to author Don Levers.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.